President Obama last night, which focus on supporting growth and job creation in the short term, clearly identified. But in and of itself, it wouldn't be satisfying. As the President also emphasized last night, it remains critical for the United States to clarify its medium-term plan to put public debt on a more sustainable path, and we certainly look forward to the proposed consolidation plan that he has announced and that he will communicate in the next few days. Terribly important. It's clearly the balancing act that I was referring to. Identify the medium-term, credible, implementable strategy to return to healthy public finance, sustainable public finance, while in the short term accommodating space for growth. The United States is a country of its own for all sorts of reasons, one including what President Giscard d'Estaing used to call the exorbitant privilege of the US dollar. Turning to the Eurozone now, policymakers face two major related challenges to the recovery. One is sovereign risks, the other one is banking risks. And because these challenges are deeply intertwined, they must both be solved to clear the way to a sustainable recovery. A lot of argument about what is capital, what is liquidity, what is funding, and how this all feeds into each other. To address sovereign risk, which is the first and foremost one, many countries in the Eurozone need more fiscal action and more clarity about the availability of sovereign financing. Fiscal adjustment is critical for the long-term sustainability of public finances in many economies, not just in the countries that are under IMF/European with support from the ECB programs. And with regard to the financing, it is critical, essential and urgent that Eurozone members actually implement as quickly as they can their groundbreaking July 21st commitment. Now, as this process unfolds, we should see a decline in sovereign risk, which should go a long way in removing some of the uncertainty weighing on the European banks, because as I said, there is an intertwining process between the two. It will take time. However urgent it is to do so, because of democracy requirements, because of parliamentary approval. And in view of the heightened risk and uncertainties and the need to convince markets, some banks need additional capital, no doubt, in the mind of the IMF and those who are doing their research work on the topic. We must not underestimate the risks of a further spread of economic weakness or even a debilitating liquidity crisis. That is why action is needed urgently so that banks can return to the business of actually financing economic activity. Now let me turn now to the United Kingdom. Strong fiscal consolidation is essential to restore debt sustainability, given two factors. One, the UK very high structural budget deficit. And two, its large financial sector relative to GDP. 500% of GDP in the UK compared with about 80% of GDP in the US, just to give you an example of how deep it is, which, as we know, can pose clearly contingent liabilities for the government sector. The IMF annual Article 4 consultation with the UK authorities, which took place over the summer and which was approved by the board of the IMF at the end of July, supported the government's plan to move decisively on the fiscal front. But we also cautioned that there are downside risks and that policymakers should be nimble. As we all know, the policy path was premised on a greater role for private sector demand, especially a robust recovery in exports, to take over as the public sector retrenched. But since the summer, the outlook has become more subdued, including, in particular, in the rest of Europe and in the United States, which are the two major trading partners of the UK. So the risk levels are rising. The policy stance remains appropriate, but the heightened risk means a heightened readiness to respond particularly if it looks like the economy is headed for a prolonged period of weak growth and high unemployment. Now, what does it mean in terms of policies? On the fiscal side, the free operation of automatic stabilizers, and there are many more automatic stabilizers in the UK than, say, in the US, for instance, which are government tax and spending programs that automatically ease the pace of deficit reduction as GDP growth slows, provides an important cushion. On the monetary side now, there is room for additional easing if the outlook does not improve soon, and it can take unconventional forms. Now, before I close, I would like to say just a few words about the financial sector, particularly in the UK. One of the key findings of a work that has been undertaken by the fund relates to the spillover effects from one economy policy to others. And one of our findings is that the UK financial stability is a global public good. And a global public good, if not properly supervised, if not properly structured and regulated, can become a global public risk. Now, recognizing this, the UK authorities' approach to stringent capital and liquidity regulations, including the emphasis on capital buffers ahead of the Basel II requirements and timing, and intensive supervision, is both commendable and essential. But the stability of the UK financial sector also depends on a stronger international framework for oversight of cross-border financial institutions. So therefore, the IMF, and I certainly welcome all the efforts that will be done in order to better coordinate, better share information, particularly when it comes to cross-border resolution, where a lot of work still remains to be done. Now, in conclusion, I will be traveling to Marseille in a few hours to participate in the G7 meeting. G7 meeting that brings together central bank governors and ministers of finance. And I certainly look forward to a good, solid discussion that I hope will be productive and will prepare the ground for heads of states to actually proceed with this bold, urgent and collective action coming forward. We will also be focusing on the Middle East and North Africa. It's a region of the world that is experiencing a historic transformation, which also has significant economic and financial consequences. And clearly those countries must take the lead in charting their forward course, in building their own economies, but they will have a strong partner with the international community, and the IMF will play its part. Now, the IMF will play its part not just with the Middle East and North Africa. It will be a partner in analysing, advising, supporting, obviously in surveying, well, it's about surveillance, right? All the economies, the advanced, the emerging, and the developing economies. And we stand ready for times that will not be easy, that will see leaders and policymakers, both on the fiscal front and the monetary front, having to take some sometimes unconventional, but certainly bold decision